What's up, guys? Welcome to Still Journeying, where we navigate inherited traditions, modern faith, and generational change. I'm joined today by a very special guest. Perhaps I might say someone who is a reason I started this show. Eugene, nice to see you today.
What's up? How are you doing, man?
I'm good. It's kind of a surreal moment for me. Eugene is a longtime co-host of Off the Pulpit, a podcast about three Korean pastors and friends chatting about life, culture, and church. He's also the executive pastor and teaching pastor at True North, based out in the Bay. I don't know if all the listeners know, but you gave a very gracious shout out pretty much a couple months before. That was literally the weekend of my wedding, more or less, when that was all coming together. My wife snuck that in, so really appreciate the shout out.
Shout out to Sonia, right? I don't want to mess up the name. Yeah, shout out to Sonia. She made that all work, so you have a good one.
Yeah, she's I'm blessed. Hey, so I want to launch right into it. There's a question I want to ask all the first time guests, and we can go from there. So when was the first time that you encountered something that was different for you, that was not what you kind of grew up with in the Christian church environment that you were surrounded by?
Great question. A lot, because I have a very splintered background. I've been raised in a Baptist church for my formative years, growing up in a very Korean speaking English ministry little brother context. The joys and the deep sorrows of a Baptist church I experienced there. A lot of politicking, but a lot of good community and family, a lot of good meals after church, but very conservative, not too charismatic. But in high school, I got introduced to a very charismatic missions organization. That's like the best way I can categorize them. I played bass growing up, bass guitar and worship. And yeah, I went out to one of those that was more in the style of like IHOP, Bethel, a lot of stuff like that. Stuff I'm not used to. And I'm not a cessationist today, aka spiritual gifting. That could be a whole different episode. But I don't lean charismatic in the outward appearance of my ministry. So even today, it's still something that I'm not used to. But that was, there was like a couple years where I was in that ministry. And I just really felt like a fish out of water. There was like a lot of stories I could tell. I'm trying to see what's appropriate. There was one time when they were like telling me, I'm like, how old was I, man? I was like 17 or 18. And I grew up church, but in a Baptist church that's like very not charismatic. And then they told me to like go cast out demons. And I was like, what? But I went out, and I don't, like, everyone's, and this is no shade to, I have a couple charismatic brothers and sisters, but there's people shaking everywhere, physically. So I'm like, oh, they must be demon possessed. And then there's a guy, like, on the ground shaking. And I was like, all right, dear God, let this demon go away. And this staff member, like, ran from across the room and tackled me. And they're like, do you know what you're doing? And I was like, no. It's like, this isn't a demon. This is a spirit entering his body. And I'm not trying to throw shade, but that was a very novel experience for me. So that's probably the first time, but it's been a lot afterwards. But that's the first time where my faith was a little, I don't say shaken up, but a different shade of the church was shown. One that I still respect. I have a lot of my own thoughts on, but, shout out to my charismatic brothers and sisters out there.
Yeah. What a story. And you said you grew up in a Korean Baptist environment, so very conservative, not a lot of that spiritual giftings. Were they even like, how some Korean churches will do like tongues or at least some of the gifts? Or was there even that, or not at all?
Man, I don't remember that much, for better or for worse. I do remember we would have like a lot of Bible trivia nights that my parents would like study like crazy for. So I think biblical literacy to a point was really high at that church. Not too charismatic, but if you're Baptist, you'll know it's just a very Baptist church I grew up in. So they voted out senior pastors left and right. So that was an interesting time.
So help me out here. You went from a very Baptist background to getting tackled while casting out demons to eventually entering ministry and becoming a pastor now in Bay Area. What kind of brought you in the ministry? Just even helping me understand the bridge of the gap over those years afterwards.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess to pick off after the demons, I go to college, and I guess the undertones of all this too, as I'm going to college, is I grew up in that church literally my whole life. Like, the first memory I have is going to that church for the first time. I was probably maybe 5 or 6. That's literally the first clear memory I have in my mind. So my family, I wasn't a PK. They weren't pastors, but I was like really involved. They were in leadership and all that stuff. But through all that, you know, I didn't consider myself a firm believer. You know, I took AP Bio and I was like, man, Charles Darwin seems pretty convincing. I see a lot of politicking too within the Korean side of the church, and I'm just like, oh man, that's weird. I also see a lot of like, you know, shady pastors, especially youth pastors that come in and come out, and just very discouraged. So walking to college, I wouldn't say I was Christian per se. I mean, I knew everything. I knew how to speak the language, but, you know, I grew up very Baptist. I also, had a very sheltered upbringing. Like, people think for some whatever reason, people at my church think like, oh, this guy must have done like a lot of weed or drugs or partying back in the day. But I did not, if anyone's listening. So because of that, when I go to college, I'm still like very Christian in my culture, you know? So I still feel a very deep aversion to what I think is like, oh man, partying and drugs and you know, getting wasted. Like, I'm not about that. I feel uncomfortable. So I joined a campus ministry called KCM in college, and I just felt very comfortable there. I wouldn't say I was there for Jesus or faith reasons. I just felt comfortable with the people and culture. So I'm there, but I think a turning point for me was realizing that all these people that I looked up to in that ministry, like the older, you know, hyungs, or Korean term for like just older brothers, or even the sisters there too, like they were all coming on their own accord. Like their parents were dropping them off, you know, it was a student run organization. And that struck me. I was like, oh, that's weird, because that's the first time I'm in a very vibrant and what I think is a very healthy, you know, faith setting, and people are coming on their own free will. So that like struck a chord. I find Tim Keller somewhere in college, I forgot when. A lot of his sermons are very formative, as many Korean Americans will probably confess to. I also meet a college pastor in a church that like I get plugged into, and a pastor that really pours into me, which is actually Tom. Shout out to him, who's on Off the Pulpit with me. And then, yeah, like through all that, I don't know when I'm saved, but you know, I was saved like 15 times if you want to put altar calls and all that stuff in. But somewhere in college, something just finally clicked. Like everything, just Jesus made sense, and not only did he make sense, it was very convincing what he was inviting me into, a life that not just living for a paycheck or for building your own fame, but a deeper life with him and in his kingdom from his own, you know, death and resurrection. I was like, that was very convincing. So I do that. And then ministry wise, like, I'm about like, you know, I'm really involved in campus ministry by my senior year, and all my good friends in college from freshman year, they had told me like, oh, I'm going to go into ministry and seminary. And I was like, all right, good luck to you, my dog. Didn't think that was at all an option or an interest for me. But I felt a little like, oh man, senior year is coming to an end. I graduated early actually, so I had like a full quarter at the UC system by myself. And I was just thinking like, you know, part of me wanted to go to law school because I watched Suits, but you know, attorney life is not like that at all. But I was like, you know, I want to learn theology still. Like I was still very like, you know, hungry to learn more. So it just kind of happened where I was like, you know what, I kind of still want to go to seminary just to see if I can learn, and we'll see where we go from there. I had no like strong desire, like I want to go into ministry walking into seminary. But I walk into seminary and I just get really plugged into college ministry through my church and through the ministry that I was still a part of. I just loved it. I love meeting with people. I love sharing a little bit about myself, but even more learning about people's lives. And there was something in me always where I was like, man, I just wish pastors would come at me differently when I was younger. And there's a moment where I was like, oh, I think I can do that. Not that I'm an expert or anything, but there was a joy in like being able to almost minister in the way that I felt like I wish I was ministered to when I was a kid. And yeah, I really enjoyed that in the first couple of years of college ministry. And then, yeah, just after a couple of stones still turning, I get a call for a full-time position up in the Bay. I moved here in 2017, and I've been in the same position, the same church, True North, since then. So that's kind of my TLDR journey into ministry.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. There's a lot of good stuff to unpack there. Probably could dive into all of it. But where did you say you grew up in? Because you moved to the Bay after all of that, right?
No, I'm from the Bay, so I kind of came home. So I'm from, if anyone's listening from the Bay Area, shout out to anyone from the Bay. I always love meeting people that are native to the Bay because it's really hard to find these days. But I grew up in the East Bay in two cities called Fremont first and then Pleasanton second. Most of my life was split between those two cities up until high school. And then I went down to SoCal for undergrad at UC Riverside. Shout out to our side. And then Talbot for seminary right after. So I spent almost 10 years in SoCal after that. Came back up in 2017. So it's kind of like coming back home, sort of.
Yeah. How has that changed for you, even that decade away from the Bay, or maybe even the environment? I know we're getting very specific. Not
coming back here, like to my position.
Yeah.
Oh, everything's different. I lived in the Bay. Well, first I lived in the East Bay. So if you don't know the Bay Area, just kind of, like anywhere, North Bay, East Bay, South Bay, and just call it the city, usually, or San Francisco. And, in the East Bay, it's the suburbs. So the city that I grew up in, it was like at one point, like the highest medium income in the US. So it's like a very wealthy suburb that I grew up in. And I also grew up pre-tech, or at least the tech boom. So when I came in 2017, that's when like tech was booming, and it was a very foreign world to me, and still is today in a little bit. I'm getting to know a little bit more, but the biggest thing that shocked me up here is like no one's from the Bay anymore. Everyone's here for vocational work. Even at our church, I would say I'm a really rare one where I'm a Bay Area native in the Bay. I would say like less than 20% of our church is like from the Bay. So it's a very, very different world that I'm ministering in. But love it, and I love the people here too.
Sorry, I'm curious because for those who don't know, my day job is in tech as well. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective what it's like being a pastor for predominantly a tech sort of background congregation. And obviously there are a lot of challenges there in terms of pursuit of career, pursuit of money, all that. What is it? Is there anything unique there for you with these Asian American tech workers that you're kind of dealing with?
Yeah, it is. It is kind of hard to like see it when you're doing it in the moment, but I think me being in SoCal, so this has come, I'm a Cali kid, so as I shared, I've spent most of my time in California, so this is going to be a little pigeonholed to that region, so spare me I'm not trying to make sweeping generalizations, but my formative years of my faith in SoCal, church was life, for better or for worse. So people really found, I think, a lot of stock in who they knew. So like one thing in the Bay we always say is like the first question you get is what do you do? I feel like in SoCal it's who do you know? So that in alone was like very different for me coming up. I think in the Bay, ministering to techies, it's like a joy and a deep challenge, as with any region. But one, if you're in the Bay and you get a tech job, you are like very good at what you do, especially in this market. Also, our college kids are Stanford kids, so they're, again, elite of the elite. So like when I look at my church, I realize like, oh, I'm almost speaking to a lot of valedictorians, a lot of people who grind, a lot of people who are like very naturally sharp or gifted, also a little neurotic. Like I realize techies are like, not in a bad, I guess in a bad way, but just an observation, like very ADHD type, like, oh, like they just love what they do. So it's really interesting because I do think the idol that, the idol that people struggle with is vocation for sure up here. So that's very interesting. But yeah, it's like techies are so interesting. Like I think it's a bubble. And the negative side of viewing it is like they think what they're doing is literally we're running the world and it's very important, which it is. We're meeting on Riverside FM, which is a techie product, you know? But there is also like a bubble element of like, there is a very big disenchantment to the world and also of politics, which, you know, I don't know what you think, but I think tech up here, it's very apolitical. Like, they really care about the stock markets more than anything. So like, I mean, like, even when, you know, in SoCal, if people are looking at their phones, and still is today, but like, maybe they're checking their fantasy score, maybe they're checking texts from friends. But if you're at church and you're checking your phone real quick, it's like usually their portfolio or the markets. And I find that, again, not in a like, oh, judgmental way, just an observation that I've made amongst this region that I'm in.
Yeah, yeah. It is different being in Seattle compared to San Francisco. I think most people who have been in both areas tend to agree with that sentiment, but it seems like the Bay is almost like the crown of tech, the place where all of the techies, all of the people who are almost borderline obsessive to what you said earlier about their jobs, about the industry, they're all there. So there's something going on with that too. What I guess do you feel like has changed then since now you've started out again, like in the Korean Baptist community? I don't know a lot about True North. I don't know a lot about the Korean American ecosystem in the Bay. What do you think has sort of happened, if you will, in those years since you were growing up to today? And what do you think has changed? Maybe for better or for worse, but curious to hear your thoughts. If you think some things are good, bad, neutral, but just wanted to hear your perspective on that.
I mean, yeah, I think within a spiritual perspective and lens, I mean, it's always been fewer churches out here than other Korean American areas. So like SoCal, I mean, a dime a dozen, even though we're a minority down there, right? Like if you drive into like the OC, you'll see Korean churches left and right on the street. Even in New York and Jersey to a point, as I'm getting to know people there more, even into Atlanta, which is another like Korean hub. But out here, there's always been, I think, like a you know, I think even statistically, and this is not just Asian, but just the church in large, I think there was a stat where it's like the second most unreached region. But you know, every region says that these days. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I think there is some credit there. So I think one, like True North, often we only get people because we're almost like the only independent English speaking Asian American church in our region. So like a lot of the churches still are like EMs connected to KMs. I mean, I'm not saying that we're the only ones. There are a bunch that we know of and that, you know, that are great churches, but it's just very few. So we do get a lot of people from that. It's not like, I don't even think it's like, oh, they love the preaching or the culture. It's just like, yeah, this is all you got. So that's interesting too, but it's just so transient. Like that's the biggest thing that I've noticed. Like even within this almost 8 years that I've been here and serving, I always joke with our lead pastor, it's like the 7th season of our show. And our major and minor characters have shifted like crazy. And that's what happens when you're in a region that's really driven by vocation. It's a really fascinating like observation because like most regions you're there because you want to be there per se, but I think the Bay is so interesting where you get a lot of people and they're like, man, I don't really want to be in the Bay, but I'm just here for work. I'm here for my company and for my, my stocks to vest and et cetera. And just because they come for their work, they can easily just leave for their work too. So I think because of that, it's also really hard for churches to get established in my mind. It's just like turnover is just insane. And we see that literally on a month-to-month basis, just in and out. So that can be very challenging at times, doing ministry out here.
I don't want to just have it, maybe to put in some sprinkles of hope or positives as well. What do you feel like is, if there's anything, it's okay if there isn't, but just good that you've seen or things that you've been encouraged by doing ministry in the Bay? Because obviously, right, there's LA, there's New York, there's all the big cities, big churches, big Asian populations. But what's unique about the Bay that you think has been able to bless you?
I think like when you get very highly achieving and skilled people, there are also cracks of like Ecclesiastes that kind of comes by, which is like all is meaningless. And you get people that have accomplished a lot, that are probably worth a lot, and that live in really big houses. And yet they're openly sharing too, like this, not only is it not enough, but it's not what I thought it would be. And in a weird way, that's like very encouraging to me, because I think there is like this, and it's been well documented too, but a spiritual resurgence, and I think it's just teetering too, like around the corner. A lot of things come into play with that too. Like techies are really, some of them are like, kind of, they go by the culture, if that makes sense. Like they're very easily swayed, by trends. And like a very cool trend that I am seeing is like people like, Wes Huff, being on Rogan, and, got the other comedians, Andrew Schultz, and all these like shows that are very big and also very, usually popular with techies. But it's cool to be Christian now, which is like very interesting to me. And it's not like there's an element where it's like, oh, maybe it's just they're just doing it for cool. But no, I think there is a genuine interest in spirituality and even Jesus being one of those options. And I'm very, very encouraged by that, because I think it's like fascinating to me. And also, there are people, as I can be very cynical. If you listen to the pod that I have, you'll probably know that very quickly about me. But I think on top of that, one of the most encouraging things is that we are running a church in the Bay with techies that are very busy and are still willing to dedicate and sacrifice their time for the church and its people. Like, I think that's actually really cool and an awesome witness that we have a director of marketing of a very big company, hosting CG. We have a dentist that owns a very successful practice that is, welcoming newcomers. That we have like people who are worth a lot in terms of their stocks and crypto or whatever it may be, setting up chairs. Like, I think that is a testament also of like just the humility of disciples that are, understand that the kingdom is more than just what they see here. So I'm always encouraged when I look at my people in that lens too.
That's awesome. You mentioned your pod. I want to talk about the pod, partially because I've been listening to it for a while, but also because I don't think it's really well documented, the story of how the Off the Pulpit podcast even started. I don't know if there's a story around that you want to tell, or maybe even like when the idea came to you. Just want to hear about how that even came to be.
Yeah. I'm kind of the one that first had the idea. And Tom, so if you don't listen, totally fine. You do not need to, but I do have a podcast called Off the Pulpit, and I run it with Jason Min and Thomas Huang and myself. Jason is a pastor in LA at Citizens. It's like the Hollywood Asian American church. Tom is a lead pastor at Grace Hill and OC. And it's a very quintessential Korean American OC church. And I don't even mean that in a bad way. It's just like he truly understands how to reach OC people. So those are our three hosts. 2017, 18, like I listen to a lot of pods. Like I like driving by myself a lot too. So, always have something on. And, I'm listening to stuff, whether it's like, at first, this cultural moment with Mark Sayers and John Mark Comer, I thought was like really helpful for me in my ministry. Always listen to Keller. What else would I listen to? Like, I discovered a pastor named John Tyson through these podcasts and all these things, and all good. And I was like, man, this is really good, but they're all white. And it's cool. Like, it's really cool. I nothing against that, but something, and this could be a whole nother, I'm sure you'll ask about this later, but something in me was like, dude, it's really good stuff, but also like I have to put it through a filter to apply it to my people. And there's something in me where I was like, man, I wish there was something for people that understood my context and like could speak to my people. And I just like, I mean, there are some out there, and I'm not like a extensive like podcast listener nowadays, especially because I'm making so many. But I was just like, man, like I just don't know of any like ones that have really helped me directly, So it just came to the idea of like, man, maybe I can start one. Not that I'm an expert or anything, but I think I'm good at asking questions and like spurring on conversations. So it was just kind of like, how can I find the right people to tag along? So at first, I actually wanted to do it with my lead pastor, Jay Song, who's the lead pastor of my church. Hands down, like very witty, very insightful, but one of the funniest guys I know. And I was like, man, I think he would be really good to do it with. And I think we even tried a pilot episode somewhere, but I think we're just kind of like, it's like, it's weird when it's two people at the same church, because it's just kind of like a church pod in that sense. And two, I think he was just like, I don't know if I could commit to like every week. So I was like, hey, it's all good. Reach out to some other people. And I kind of wanted to do with people I didn't know to kind of have like a new dynamic. But some of them I was like really interested in, and like everyone was like kind of open to it, but just kind of like, it just didn't work out. And then I was just like, you know what? Like Tom, I literally, I DM'd, and we have DM'd so much on just stuff like ministry, chopping up, everything like trends, scandals, all these things within the church world. And I was just like, I didn't want to ask him at first because I was like, we know each other and I want to do it with someone new. But I was like, I think he'd be good. So I was like, I think I could convince him to do it. And he's also like, he reads like probably more than some PhD scholars out there. Like he has a ferocious appetite for information. So I knew like that would be really helpful to have. But I also knew like we're also very similar. Like we're super cynically haters, So it's just like, I wouldn't want to listen to only that. So I was like, man, who could like balance this out? And the first person that came to my mind was Jason. I forgot how I met Jason or how I even established a friendship with him. But Jason's just one of those guys when you meet where you're like, I really want to get to know this guy because he just has a really deep warmth to him. He's very life-giving. He's a type 9 on Enneagram, 2AT. And I was like, I think us three could have a very interesting dynamic because Jason is like very, very warm and life-giving and empathetic. Tom is very calculated, reads everything. And I'm kind of like in the middle where I'm just like, I'm a type 7 on Enneagram. I like connecting. I like having fun. I'm also not a lead pastor. So I thought like, there's so many different combinations that work. So yeah, that's how it started. And, I think we were just like, the reason why it's called Off the Pulpit is just like, I kind of told them like, I want this to be a space where we can talk about things like that we can't say on the pulpit. Things like, what does it mean to be an Asian American and Christian at the same time? Things like that. So that's kind of the genesis of it. I don't think we thought we'd be going this long. I think it was just kind of, and this was in the middle of COVID. I think it was like September of 2020 when it started. So it's been like, it's been 5 years, which is insane to me. But like Yeah, like my kids were literally 2 and now they're like in first and second grade, now that we're where we're at. So yeah, like it's been good, but more than anything, like it's just 3 friends talking. And I think that's the beauty of it. Like it's not at least I hope, I mean, they tell me it's not, but at least for me, it's not a drain to like get online with them. Like I actually look forward to it. We always do it on Sunday nights, like after a long day of ministry for all 3 of us. So it's like awesome to do. And yeah, like I think we always tell people the friendship is literally what has kept us alive more than anything. So that's kind of the, I don't know, the lore or the genesis story behind the pod.
Yeah. It's really encouraging. And I think there are lots of listeners, including myself, who have benefited from exactly what you talked about, having a Asian American focused lens on things. Were there maybe episodes or topics that you feel like you were surprised at the reception, or maybe things that you were like, oh, like I didn't actually know that many people would like really want to resonate with that and just even like DM and say I appreciated it? Or I guess the question I'm trying to get at is how has the podcast maybe surprised you as you've been hosting it over the years? Obviously, I know you mentioned you didn't expect to do it this long, but what else, I guess, has been interesting for you in that journey?
I mean, the deepest surprise is always like that, you know, and we're not huge per se, but how, like, the surprise is that people listen and like are like feel that it's helpful. And I don't mean that just in like a you know, an Asian humble sense, but in more of like, I think Asian Americans have like deep imposter syndrome, and it was evident even when we were doing the pod, where I was like, you know, we would always, before we started, no one's going to listen or no one's going to care. Let's just say whatever we want, you know, which maybe might help, you know, the rawness of the pod. But it's always like, you know, we go to random places either together or alone. And not that we're like, oh, like we, you know, celebrities or anything, but it's the randomest places where people are like, oh, like, yeah, thanks for like doing that. And I was like, what the heck? Like, that's so crazy that you listen from Minnesota or Texas or like Atlanta, like places that 3 of us have no connections to. But yeah, it's like surprising and also encouraging that the story that we have, there is solidarity to it, of like this weird immigrant, exile, whatever you want to call it, story. Like people are living that even to this moment, and that you're not alone. So that's been surprising. In terms of episodes that are surprising, with the feedback, I mean, we did like a very big one, with, a girl named Chrissy Rowe, who is like one of my like, she's a gangster. I always tell people that, if you want to know the story, you can listen. But basically, in the campus ministry that I was a part of, there was a missions leader who was recording girls in the bathroom, you know, for his own private collection, whether in the shower, whatever they were doing. And she was basically one that exposed it. And I remember we were like thinking about doing that episode, and there was a lot of thought and prayer before, like, are we just doing it for the clicks? Are we just doing it to get, you know, popular? Are we just, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But I think we're like, no, I think we want to do this because no one talks about this stuff, especially our people. So there was a lot of fear in doing that. And you know that we did get feedback that wasn't the best. It was always, some of it was like, oh, this feels like gossipy, or like, why did you guys post this? You guys are rehashing old trauma wounds that, you know, for a couple of weeks, I was like pretty, like, it was pretty nerve wracking for me, like always checking my phone to see if we had more DMs. But as the dust settled, especially with Christy, like, she's the one that was like, when we approached her, she's like, I do want to do this because I want this story to be heard. And yeah, I was like surprised that like it affected people, hopefully in a certain way, of understanding that like we should own up to our trauma and abuse that we live in. Because if not, we just repeat that stuff. So that was surprising. And there's other stuff that's not surprising. Like our dating episodes always do well, because that's a low hanging fruit. So if you ever need like an episode grab, Steven, just do one on dating. But the most surprising guest that I enjoyed was a guy named Harrison Scott Key. And if you haven't listened to that episode, if you can only listen to one episode of our pod, you should listen to that. He's basically a Christian, not a pastor at all. He's an author who he found out his wife was cheating on him and then wrote a book called, I think, How to Stay in Love or How to Stay Married. I'm really bad with titles, but basically he was like, I'm going to stay married to this person. And they ended up staying married. And it was fascinating hearing from a non-pastoral perspective on something that crazy. So that was the most surprising guest on my.
Those are both great episodes. I'm going to +1 everything you said. Christy's story is very powerful. It did do a lot for, I think, a lot of different people. And Harrison's story was also really, really, I think, unique, like you said, really surprising in a weird way. But also at the same time, really encouraging. The perspective he had just really challenged a lot of things that I think I grew up around. You've touched on this, like, Asian Americanness and identity and sort of the way that it resonates with people through the podcast. I don't know if you want to share just your perspective or maybe what the three of you are seeing. When you look at the Asian American or maybe Korean American or maybe even just Korean American Californian, however big you want to make that scope, what are you seeing right now in terms of the identity of the Korean American church, the Christian, the believer who is in the pews, who is in listening to these podcasts, who is kind of questioning all these things and thinking through all this?
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing, or maybe the best way I can frame is what I'm realizing is that we're like very young. And I think I'm realizing that as we're doing this pod, like with Jason and Tom and doing more episodes, like we're very young. Not only church, let's forget about church. Let's just think about immigrants. So again, I'm only going to speak about Korean Americans, and this might be even more like West Coasty Californian. So apologize if I'm making big generalizations, but I think like compared to Chinese Americans, we have come later to the state, you know, and also from different circumstances too. And it's like really interesting to me. Like, again, big generalization, but it's so interesting. Like all my Chinese American friends, like they're like, yeah, like I got a house, you know, my parents bought real estate, so they're just going to give it to me. I was like, well, lucky for you, bro. Like I don't know many Korean Americans that have that because we're very much younger. Like our kids will probably get our real estate, you know? So realizing one, like as Korean Americans, many of us like we're much younger than other East Asian, or just Asian American immigrants in general, but especially East Asian immigrant. Like, you know, Japanese Americans have been here forever. They've been through a lot too. That's why I think there's so much vibrancy within Japanese church. Chinese Americans too have been here a little longer than us. And I think that shows as well. But for us, like Korean Americans, like we're so young, you know, as a ethnicity or subgroup in America. And then you add in the church, right? So like a English speaking Korean American dominant church, we're the first of our kinds to do this, you know? Like, we don't have a lot of empty nesters that are Korean Americans, you know? Like most of us have kids in elementary or, you know, middle school, maybe high school, maybe. So that's huge. 'Cause we are figuring things out as we go. And I think that's a big realization that I've been making because it's like, that helps me realize the mistakes that we make or the frustration that we feel. It's okay. It's like a baby learning how to walk. You're going to fall a lot, you know? So I think the frustration that I often feel, it's like, it's making me first realize like, oh, I think this is just a learning curve that we're going through. And then I think on the second hand, I think we're on the cusp of like, also as we're young, like figuring something out. Like, again, this is from, especially like, for some reason in California, a lot of the Korean Americans, most of them have a very heavy reformed history or a kind of like influence. Like Keller was like the biggest influence for many, like every Korean American pastor you know of probably preaches like Keller. It's 3 points, some culture added in. The third point is always Jesus in some weird way, you know? Great. I think that's fine. But I think we're also realizing from the people at least I'm talking to is like, well, I don't even think that reform world that we're a part of, that we really like Keller with, TGC, for example, the Gospel Coalition, that's also not us. Not in a bad way, not in a good way. It's just not us. So I think a lot of the Korean Americans I've talked to that usually were really entrenched in the T4G camp or the TGC camp or West Candido camp or etc. I think a lot of them are also realizing like, oh, like that doesn't speak to my people and my culture, you know? So I think it's a weird time. Like we're on the cusp. Like there's a lot of things going on. There's like the Solo Network, the Core Collective, Asian American Christian
collaborative.
Yeah.
I think.
So I don't even know all these things, you know? And it's interesting to me because I'm like, oh, I think there's something brewing. And there, even within the denominations that I hear, there's like also chatter of like, oh, are we even supposed to be here? Because you look at our Korean forefathers, a lot of them are like, dude, screw the system, like, and maybe more out of survival because they couldn't speak English. Like they just made their own denomination. So it's almost like a question of like, are we going to do that in our youthful infancy stage? So that's like the biggest macro things that I see right now within that church world or culture. So yeah,
those are really interesting, and it does sound like, I think even as I listen to the three of you talk, it does feel like we are at an inflection point. It hasn't quite, we don't fully know where we're going to end up yet, but it does feel like something is turning around the corner for sure. You talked about a lot of things like networks and church leadership, identifying where they want to go. What do you think that's going to mean for like the lay person, the normal Korean Joe Kim showing up to services like 5-10 years from now? What do you, and I won't hold you to this. Hopefully no one will come back and say, you said this 10 years ago, but where do you think we're headed?
Like, honestly, for the layperson, especially if you're a layperson listening, first, you know, thanks for listening to a very, you know, nerdy topic, I guess. I don't think most of them will notice anything. And I think that's good. I think my hope is that in 10 years, the layperson will only be like, oh, you know what? This preaching is much more helpful. This community group curriculum is much more applicable. Like, the worship songs we're singing, oh, actually, like, that feels like a part of my heritage, whatever that may mean. I hope that's the outcome, because I think Tom said this, and it's always stuck with me, where we did an episode on worship, and it's just like, dude, like, we don't even, like, most Korean American worship bands are just really bad Hillsong American Idol cover band, you know? And it's like, you know, when you look at the Black church, there's literally not just a worship section, but a genre of music called gospel that came from them. You walk into a Latino American church, a Latin American church, like the worship is very different. And I think Asian Americans is one space where you walk into and it's like, is it different? Like, not yet. You know, there's like, again, we're young. Like, we don't even have worship leaders or songwriters. And I think that stuff's really important. So my hope is like, yeah, I can't predict anything, but my hope in 10 years is that the layperson feels less confused at church. Not that they feel confused now, but I just hope they feel more at home, you know? Because I'm a big believer that like ethnicity and culture is not everything, but it is something, and it's a gift from God. Like when you look at Revelation, there's a collection of food from different cultures that will be fed. And I'm like, that's great. And that only happens when you celebrate the ethnic, you know, story and upbringing you're from. And yeah, I'm just like, what does Asian American preaching look like? I don't know yet, you know? Because like, at least my own journey, it's like I was a Keller clone for a little bit. And then for the last couple of years, I was like a really bad version of John Mark Comer. And now I'm like, I don't know. And I'm like, I'm hoping our baby steps can feed a healthier ecosystem for our people in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. The gospel redeems all cultures, and it doesn't erase them. And I think I agree with you that we're moving somewhere. towards that identity. My hope, and I don't know if I've said this before on the pod, is that a generation or two down the road, they're not even worrying about this whole identity thing. Yes, they're aware of who they are, and they know they're Asian American, but they're not saying, so what does that mean for my church or for my context or for how I read the word or all those things? That there's a literacy in, or an ability to almost exegete the identity, if you will, and just know who they are.
I agree. And I hope that too. I would also add, the gospel doesn't only redeem all cultures, but the culture also helps you magnify the gospel more. So meaning like, even how we view the gospel. I know this is a big talking point these days. What is atonement? All that stuff. And I don't want to nerd out too much, but I also think the atonement model of the gospel that we have been fed, not that anything's wrong with it, but it also comes from a very Western lens. And, this might scare off some listeners that are already listening if like, oh, this guy's a little too woke. But just like, even, look, there is guilt totally involved with the gospel, right? And that's an integral part. I'm not saying that's not. But I think we've also been taught that's the only part of the gospel, But we don't, like, Asians don't really deal with guilt too much, but they really deal with shame a lot, And I think the gospel also takes away your guilt, but it's also clear in scriptures, like, it also takes away your shame. And, like, that's not talked about enough. Like, I was listening to, like, a podcast that my wife was listening to from TGC. Forgot who it was, so, like, I'm not gonna name drop anyone, but I think they were like, the songs that we sing, like, they're too much about, like, shame these days, because the gospel primarily deals with our guilt. And I was like, whoa, like, primarily is a very strong word, And I'm not trying to diminish it at all. That, like, I'm not saying, like, yeah, sin doesn't exist. It's just the gospel's about making you a better person. That's not what I'm saying. But if you diminish it to only that, like, again, not to be blunt, that's a very white thing to think. Like guilt is, like, kind of how they view life and am I doing the right thing or wrong thing? But I think we can bring so much more flavor and fullness to that story that Jesus has given us. Right? Like Romans 12:1, it's like, do not conform yourselves to the patterns of this world. There's so many patterns that also each ethnicity is dealing with, that also it's although we are very aware of it, other ethnicities are probably not aware they're dealing with it. And I'm just like, I think we are a gift to the church. And I don't want to say to the gospel, but to our understanding of the gospel. So I'm really curious to see where that goes.
Let me ask you a question and then let me explain where I'm coming from. So you talked about shame. I would wonder what your opinion is on how the gospel redeems people away from shame into honor in particular. The reason I say that is because the second episode of this pod was on the 3D Gospel, a book by Jason Georges. I think I've mentioned it to you too. And he talks about shame and he talks about honor. And the guys, we sat in that room, and I still think about this moment now, where we just kind of all realized we deeply understand shame, but none of us could articulate in that moment how God brings us into honor. And that actually has been, even to this day, festering away at me a bit. So not to put you on the spot or anything, but what would you say is a gospel redemption of the shamed, of the shameful, if you will?
Yeah, I think, I can't give like a full answer. I'm not an expert in that. But I will say this. I think like the gospel can teach, I'm just going to speak very like to Korean Americans. What can it teach you about honor? Well, it can teach you that like, you don't need to first always be like fake humble. That's not like, that's shame talking to you. You know what I'm saying? And so I think Jason made this point where I think they were in like, Jason's also a very talented musician. So he actually had like a music career before going to ministry. And I think he was on a worship team mixed with like a lot of people, very talented people. And the drummer was black. And I think they were getting compliments from people. And I forgot, maybe the guitarist or bassist was Asian. And, and the black drummer was right next to him. And it was like, oh, like, dude, good job. What's the typical Asian answer? Like, oh, no, please, I'm okay. Like, thank you. And I remember Jason told me like the black channel humor was like, hey, yo, what's your problem, dog? It's like, no, what are you talking about? It's like, when people are complimenting you, like, just take it. Like, just say thank you and like own your gifting, you know? And I thought about that and I was like, oh man, that's also in a weird way like a insufficient definition of honor. Like we don't even know what it feels like to be honored ourselves, that we think that any type of honoring can also be pride. So like to me, I'm like, dude, I think, you know, what the gospel can do for shame, there's a lot that we can talk about, but what can we do for honor? Well, it's like one, like, I mean, Jesus always says like encourage one another, right? And like the one another's are really long, but like one of the things I think Korean Americans are really bad at, and maybe just Asian Americans in general, is like giving genuine encouragements. And why? Because your dad didn't give you any, right? And this is again where the gospel speaks so much truth. What does the gospel tell you? It does tell you that you're a guilty sinner and that you're in need of redemption, but it also tells you that Jesus came to redeem you for a purpose, right? So like my point with the gospel that I often get frustrated with my church people is like, your gospel ends with I'm a sinner and I'm saved, and I'm like, yes, but what are you saved into? What are you saved for? And you are saved into the kingdom to be made more in the image of God that God has given you. And that, what is that? That's like God honoring the design that God's given you. So I think like in that point, like there's so much to be unpacked within what that means for us. Like, what does it mean to be truly living not only, again, I want to make this emphasis, not only in mercy and not only in the grace that Jesus has given us, but being also made into the image of Christ and living out the image of the Imago Dei in all of us. Like that, there's so much honor in that. And I think that would help so much. A healthy understanding of the image of God, I think, can help with what honor looks like. So like, I think to that point, like, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Like, the gospel is such a multifaceted, like, I think that book kind of talks about it too, but it's a diamond that has like every angle of a diamond has a different shine to it. And like, this is like my big thing where I'm like, yeah, as Asians, we need this, man. Like I want to be very careful how I say this, but we have been drilled in us that we are guilty. Like a big generalization again. White culture may need that more. Just saying, as a big generalization. But for us, if you're Asian listening to me, not even Korean, but if you're just Asian, immigrant Asian especially, like, you were always taught you are guilty, but you were never taught that you were loved. That's a big arc. And I'm like, dude, the gospel has all of that. It has all. There's room for all of that in the trunk. So yeah, I think that's how it can play into honor a little bit.
Yeah. To give some hope, I'm at a Japanese American church. There's like 30 Japanese and like 120 English. And one thing that I think is really big about that is that they have been around for so long. We're celebrating like our 75th anniversary this month. The church has been around for a while, like we mentioned earlier. Uniquely, I think, to that is the fact that we have Asian American elders who are friendly, have big smiles on their faces. Maybe it's the Hawaiian culture too, but they just say, hey, it's so good to see you. And they give you a hug. And the aunties give you a hug. And you feel so warm and loved. And I think that's something that I hope is going to come with the coming generations, perhaps even to the point of overcorrection, who knows? But at least that there can be a correction over the generations, because clearly over the decades of the church, it seems like there was something that happened, at least within that Japanese American context. Who knows if it applies to the Korean American? But I certainly know a lot of church attendees who are Chinese or Korean heritage. And I think whether they're aware of it or not, the thing that I've consistently said is I think the people in my congregation are there because this is a reprieve from that negative, gossipy, always being fake humble sort of environment. It feels like whether or not they've ever articulated it, actually my body is, the older people in our local church body have really been able to grasp onto a real, genuine honoring of one another. And that's powerful. And I think it's possible for others to absorb as well. So
Yeah, I think that's good. I think like hopefully when Korean Americans get a little older, I do think the literal not just the elders, but the literal elders of the church can also breathe so much life if they can give again, not that they'll fix everything, but be an authoritative older face, like you mentioned, that isn't filled with the Asian tropes of what an older, authoritative, elderly face looks like. Like even simple things like you going to a younger person saying hello, like could do wonders. and as the spirit's moving can heal so many things. So like I think that's great.
yeah. Well, we're almost at time here. I guess my last question for you, before we hop off, Eugene, is if someone's listening right now and this is all like a little bit crazy to them, or they're like, whoa, I don't know anything about anything you just talked about, like maybe what are some words of encouragement you would have for them, or maybe where would you tell them or point them perhaps to get started on this journey of identity, of who they are, of all the things that we've just covered today?
That's a good question. I think like you got, let me just talk to the Asian American males first, because I am one. Easier to think about that. I think you gotta learn how to articulate what you're going through. There's an author by the name Lewis Hyde. He had a quote that has stuck with me for the longest time, where he says, "Articulation allows a gap between what you feel and who you are, and it's within that gap that you will have freedom to be who you're called to be." Something along those lines. Not a Christian. I don't think he's a Christian guy, but I think there's a lot of common grace wisdom in that. And I think for many Asian American Christians, you have been, if I know your story well, and I don't want to, again, I know I keep saying this, I don't want to generalize, but I think a lot of you will empathize. You have been taught to be Christian. You have been communally gated to be Christian. You have been habituated to be Christian, but you never owned that fact to be Christian. And, so meaning like you were brought out, dragged by your parents to church, and that's a blessing. That's not a bad thing, but you're dragged. And then you go to college and maybe you join campus ministry, but when you're at that campus ministry, like everything is cared for you. It's a bubble, which is a good bubble to live in those years. But your Christian life is based upon that hype, that energy that is just not realistically sustainable, in life. And then you get older, you start going out of habit, which is still a good practice to have. But for many of you, if you're like me, you've never really asked yourself, do I really believe any of this? And do I even want this? And I think like, I have an analogy. I think I've written something about this at TGC, and I have a couple sermons about this, but I always tell people, like, many of you have rented your faith for a very long time through a landlord. Maybe a landlord's Tim Keller, great landlord, friendly guy. Maybe it's your youth pastor growing up. Maybe it's the culture that you lived in. There's a lot of landlords out there, and landlords are cool. It's great. But the thing is, with the lease, like, it always will end. It's a lease for a reason, and you gotta own it. You gotta put your name on the deed. When you rent a house, if things start breaking, you don't really care as long as you get your security deposit back, right? But when you own a house, you gotta fix every little crack that you see, and you gotta own that. And I think with the same way, like I would encourage Asian Americans, males and females, whoever you are, to really ask yourself, like, do I own this? Or have I just been carrying on the family legacy, the habit, the collegiate, energy or vibes that I had that are slowly dying off? Because faith isn't vibes. It's not what you feel. It's a matter of, it's a point of, do I believe this or not? And that's something that you gotta do. And I think as Asian Americans, this is why it's so important. It's really easy to get stuck in the emotions and lost in that emotion. Like, we do it all the time. Like, you see your parent, like, we have words for this in Korean that I don't even know how to say well, but in a lot of every Asian culture I know, there's like a two-faced word where that you are a certain way with your parents, right? You code switching is an English word, but certain way with your friends, you're a certain way with people that are younger than you, certain way with people that are older than you. Even within Korean language, there's a different language for people that are older than you, your age, under you, all this hierarchy and all that stuff. What it kind of habituates is you are just getting used to the motions of being one person here, another person there. And I think the question you gotta really ask yourself is like, do you own this? Like, is Jesus someone that is a theory or an actual person and a reality? And I would just invite you, like, he is real, and it's so much sweeter and deeper on the other side of faith of when you own. It's scary. Not having a landlord is scary. If you own a house, you'll know that. Putting a down payment down and rates these days, like, I know it's scary. I know it's tough. But once you make that commitment to make Jesus central in your heart, and in, like, you know, I don't want to say like your personal Lord and Savior, because we all know what that means, but like when he's real, it's so much sweeter than this fake rented faith that we've been living. So I would just invite you into that if you are there. And if you are struggling, no shame on you too. Like, it's a journey that we're all on, and everyone's in a different state. Just keep being curious and keep asking questions. That will ultimately lead you to Jesus, because that's what he was doing in the Gospels as well.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, if I had to put it in a phrase, it would just be being honest about where we're at and letting God work in that. And really appreciate it. That was well articulated. Well, thank you so much for being on the pod, Eugene. And this is, again, just a weird, surreal experience even for me, having listened to you for many years now, and now having you on. It's been really cool.
For sure. Thanks, Steven. Those listening, thanks for listening. I think I've gotten to know Steven very recently, but even through conversing with him, I'm very encouraged by, I guess, the future of the Asian American church too. So thanks for having on. Keep doing this stuff. Find friends that you can keep talking to for this stuff, and it'll be great. So I'm very encouraged by all that you're doing.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Don't forget to check out Off the Pulpit. Great show. And see you on the next episode. Thanks, everyone.